Wade Wilson. Globally, that name evokes the Marvel anti-hero, a fictional character. In Cape Coral, Florida, that name is a scar. It represents a real-life horror. Before the ink and infamy, there was just a man. He was tall, over 6 feet, with a rugged build and a smile that put everyone at ease. Wade moved through local social circles with a practiced, lethal grace, a figure who could charm any stranger. He didn't look like a monster, he seemed ordinary. But beneath the surface lay a void where empathy should have been. The night of October 7th, 2019 began typically. The neon lights of a local music bar hummed with energy. Among the crowd was Christine Melton, known for her kindness. She met Wade that evening and the connection seemed natural. They shared drinks and conversation, the atmosphere light. When the night wound down, Wade accompanied Christine back to her home. It was her final chapter. As she drifted into sleep, safe in her bedroom, the man she had just met underwent a terrifying transformation. Without provocation, Wade reached out and began to squeeze the life out of her. The strangulation was instantaneous. After the deed was done, there was no panic in Wade Wilson. Instead, he simply took Christine's car keys and drove away, leaving her lifeless body. He was a predator on the move, and his appetite for destruction had only just been whetted. He wasn't looking for a place to hide. He was looking for his next target. Just a few hours later at dawn, Wade crossed paths with Diane Ruiz. Diane was a 43-year-old mother and bartender walking to her job. She was a hard-working mother. To Wade, however, she was merely another opportunity to exert his dark will. The abduction of Diane Ruiz was a masterclass in senseless cruelty. He lured her into the stolen vehicle, and once she was inside, the nightmare resumed. Wade later described the events with a chilling detachment. He strangled Diane, but that wasn't enough to satisfy the darkness within. In a move that defied human comprehension, he pushed her out of the car and used the vehicle as a weapon. He ran her over repeatedly, driving back and forth over her body until she was unrecognizable. There was no motive but the thrill of killing. Before we continue, subscribe to the channel and tell us in the comments where you are watching from. In the aftermath, Wade reached out to his biological father, Stephen Testaseca. In a phone call that sounded like a casual recap, Wade told his father exactly what he had done. He didn't sound remorseful. He sounded like he was bragging. He described the murders as a spree, a word that implies sick pride. Stephen was thrust into an unthinkable moral dilemma. This was his son, yet the person on the other end was a beast. The conflict was agonizing, but the horror of Wade's actions outweighed the bonds of biology. Stephen knew what he had to do and contacted the authorities. The manhunt was already beginning. While Wade was drifting across the city, police discovered Christine Melton's body. The discovery sent shock waves through the community. A quiet neighborhood became a crime scene, and as the investigation unfolded, the name Diane Ruiz surfaced as a missing person. The frantic search for Diane became a race against time. Wade remained at large, his behavior becoming increasingly erratic. He was a ticking time bomb, moving through the Florida landscape with a chilling lack of concern. Police finally began to close in on a stolen vehicle matching the description of the one Wade had taken from Christine's home. They prepared for a high-stakes arrest, expecting a desperate attempt to flee. But they had no idea that the man they were about to pull from that car was already beginning a physical transformation that would shock the world. The Wade Wilson who had walked into that bar on October 7th was disappearing, replaced by a visual manifestation of the darkness that had lived inside him all along. When the police finally surrounded the stolen vehicle, they expected a desperate struggle. But Wade Wilson stepped out with a terrifyingly placid expression. He was arrested without the resistance expected from a man who had just committed 2 brutal murders. In the interrogation room, officers were met with chilling indifference. Wade sat there, leaning back as if discussing a mundane afternoon rather than the systematic destruction of lives. He was forthcoming but not regretful. His voice was steady, his eyes vacant, detailing his movements with a precision that made detectives' skin crawl. He spoke of the spree casually, confirming the horrific story his biological father had relayed to the police. He offered no apologies, only cold facts. While Wade was in custody, a massive search was underway for Diane Ruiz. For agonizing days, her family clung to a sliver of hope that was ultimately shattered. Her body was discovered in a desolate, wooded area hidden by overgrowth, and the scene was a testament to the savagery Wade described. The evidence of the car being driven over her repeatedly confirmed this was a calculated act of dehumanization. The community mourned as the search ended in tragedy, their fears realized in the most brutal fashion imaginable. The scene left even seasoned investigators shaken by the level of unnecessary violence inflicted upon a woman who was simply walking to her job. As the legal proceedings began, a strange phenomenon unfolded behind the bars of the county jail. Wade Wilson began to use his skin as a canvas for his internal chaos. While awaiting trial, his face began to vanish behind a mask of dark ink. He underwent a metamorphosis meant to provoke visceral fear in everyone who looked at him. The most striking was the wide, jagged grin tattooed across his cheeks, reminiscent of the Joker, a permanent sneer that mocked the gravity of the courtroom. Swastikas and symbols of hate were etched into his skin, signaling a total rejection of society. He was no longer the charismatic man from the bar. He had become a living monument to his own darkness. The media seized upon his appearance, dubbing him the Deadpool killer. Wade embraced this with narcissistic zeal. He didn't shy from cameras, instead he preened. He treated the courtroom like a theater where he was the undisputed star. Every time he entered, the gallery gasped at his latest facial tattoos. He turned his head slowly, ensuring lenses caught every sharp line of ink, his eyes scanning the room with predatory coldness. This was not a man seeking mercy, but one seeking infamy. He seemed to relish the role of the villain, turning a somber search for justice into a macabre spectacle. The emotional peak of this phase arrived when Stephen Testaseca took the witness stand. The silence was deafening as the father looked upon the son he had turned in. Stephen's testimony was a harrowing account of a father realizing his child was a predator. He recounted phone calls where Wade spoke of the killings with joy, a detail that sent a shiver through the jury. To hear a father describe his own son's bloodlust was a moment of raw, painful honesty. Stephen chose justice over blood, sealing the reality of Wade's depravity through a testimony that left the courtroom haunted. The defense team argued Wade's actions resulted from a diseased mind, citing drug abuse to paint him as a victim of his own biology. However, the prosecution was relentless. Whereas they focused on the calculation and the deliberate nature of the strangulations, The evidence showed a predator who knew exactly what he was doing at every turn. They argued Wade didn't kill because he was confused, but because he enjoyed the power. Throughout the testimonies, Wade sat with a smirk. While Christine Melton's family wept, he stared into the distance. When Diane Ruiz's loved ones spoke of their loss, he looked into the cameras with a chilling smile. He had detached himself from the human experience, leaving the world to wonder if there was any soul left behind that mask. The courtroom waited in breathless silence as the legal arguments concluded. As the jury retreated to deliberate, the question wasn't about guilt, but whether the legal system would grant him the ultimate punishment he seemed to be daring them to give. More than the air in the courtroom was heavy with the weight of years spent waiting for this moment. When the jury finally filed back into their seats, the silence was so absolute, it felt like a physical presence. Wade Wilson sat at the defense table, his tattooed face a stark contrast to the somber suits of the legal teams. He did not look at the jury. He did not look at the families. When the clerk read the words, "guilty on all counts, including 2 counts of first-degree murder," there was no gasp of surprise, only a collective exhale from the gallery. Justice was beginning its slow, methodical turn. Wade remained a statue of indifference. His eyes glazed over as if he were watching a movie that no longer interested him. With the verdict secured, the trial shifted into the penalty phase. During the high-stakes battle between a life behind bars and the finality of the needle. It was here that the masks of legal jargon were stripped away, replaced by the raw, bleeding reality of the survivors. The most devastating moment came when Diane Ruiz's son stood before the court. He didn't talk about the man with the tattoos. He talked about the mother who would never see him achieve his dreams. He spoke into the void Wade had created, forcing everyone in the room to confront the human cost of a spree. For a moment, the focus was pulled away from the spectacle of the Deadpool killer and back to the life of a woman who was deeply loved. As the recommendation for the death penalty was read, the camera zoomed in on Wade's face, searching for a crack in the armor. They found nothing. He appeared almost bored, leaning back in his chair with a stoicism that defied the gravity of his situation. It was a final, silent middle finger to the society that was now officially discarding him. When the judge delivered the final sentence, her words were a scathing indictment of his character. She described his actions as vile, heinous, and cruel, noting that he had shown a level of depravity that left the court with no other choice. Wade was officially sentenced to Florida's death row, his fate sealed in the very legal system he had mocked. Yet as the courtroom doors closed, a disturbing second life for the case began to bloom on the internet. In the digital shadows, Wade Wilson became a viral sensation. Despite the brutality of his crimes, thousands of fangirls began to flood social media with messages of support and even attraction. This phenomenon, known as hybristophilia, showcased a dark corner of the human psyche where the most dangerous predators are treated like misunderstood icons. Letters poured into the jail, filled with declarations of love for a man who had admitted to horrific violence. It was a bitter irony. While the victims lay in their graves, the killer was receiving fan mail. There was no redemption to be found in the final days before his transfer. Wade Wilson never offered a word of apology. He never attempted to explain the why or show a flicker of the person he had been. He remained consistent in his coldness until the very end. When the time came for his transfer to Rayford, the maximum security Florida State Prison, the transformation was complete. The Deadpool mask of ink and arrogance was no longer a badge of rebellion. Bruce was simply the face of another inmate in a standard orange jumpsuit. As he entered the heavy gates of death row, the viral fame began to fade. In the end, this tragic story is not really about the man with the tattoos or the persona he adopted. It is about Christine Melton and Diane Ruiz, two women whose futures were stolen in a single night of madness. It is about the families who carry the heavy weight of their absence every single day, and the community of Cape Coral that had to learn how to feel safe again. Their legacy is the love they left behind, an enduring light that no amount of darkness or ink can ever truly extinguish. We are left to wonder about the fundamental nature of evil. As the heavy steel doors of Rayford slam shut, the world moves on to other stories. But for the grieving families, it years the scars of the man who shared a name with a hero will never truly heal.